you're going to see this whole passage speaks about the brightness of Jesus. This passage describes a glowing man. Is there any biblical precedent for that? I know the Mount of Transfiguration. Remember, his head and his hairs were white like wool. So I want you to stop. I want you to think about that, but then let's go to the next one. As white as snow. And his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burn in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. Who are the only people on the earth who have woolly hair? So-called black man. Jesus has woolly hair. How's he going to have woolly hair if he's not a so-called black man? His eyes were a flame of fire. This is our people when we're upset, angry, or some actually say, I'm not kidding you, that Jesus has had a little wine, and that's why he's coming back to wreck shop. Some of them say that. His feet were like burnt fine brass, as if they burn in the furnace. If anything burns, what color is it? Anything that burns is black. So how can he have black feet and not have black on the rest of his body? That don't make no sense. Forgetting about the white head part. Forgetting about the white head part. Forgetting about the white head part. White like wool. The Greek really says what it says there. There's no trick behind it. It is a simile to describe. What is it describing? It's clear if you look at the passage, color, not texture. How do you know? Here's a question to ask your Hebrews life friend. That's an interesting interpretation. What texture is snow? If the wool is texture, then why isn't the snow? Jesus' hair melts when you touch it. He's going white wool. Not white like black wool. That's what it says. Now, if they're watching this, they'll say, oh, Vocab's tricking these people. He didn't go to Daniel 7, the background to this passage. Now, you can go there. That's the passage that interconnects with this. And also, what about like fine brass? What about that? Well, let's look at that. This Greek word for the fine brass is nowhere else in Greek literature. Burnt. It's as if they burned. This is happening. While something is burning, is it crispy black burnt? Burnt. It's as if they burned. This is happening. Burnt. It's as if they burned. This is happening. While something is burning, is it crispy black burnt, especially metal? What color is burning metal?
I want to give all the praises and the honor to Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Bahashem, Rucha HaQuadash, and double honors to the elder apostles, even the elder bishops of Great Millstone. Honors as well to you other brethren, you followers of the truth, you fellow believers, and shalom to the elect. So anyway, we went into this several times before in the Revelations 1 and 14, but we're probably going to go a little bit more. You know, it never gets old to me because we are fighting and defending for truth, and this is all about truth's sake. No matter how many interpretations people have, you can look in the Bible. The Most High set it up where you can look in the Bible and you can make your interpretation about anything. So we're just going to dive right into it. Let's go to Luke 8 and 17. It says, for nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known to come abroad. Right? So it was funny. It's crazy because I put in the Google Russian icons, and years ago when you Googled Russian icons, you saw nothing but so-called, black people, right? That's what you mostly saw, is a whole bunch of paintings of anything before the Renaissance of black images. Now you tend to see a whole lot more white images populating up in there, and this is their sneaky and trickery, right? So I put in Russian icon Dark Ages, and then the regular black images popped up again. So this is how it go. I mean, if the world goes on 50 years from now, they'll have Michael Jackson looking like a pure white man, even though he permed his hair and bleached his skin. They'll trim the nose and they'll do anything. These people are low level, and this is why they fight and come against, and they're so racist, right? And then when we stand up against it, then all of a sudden we're the racists. So anything, I noticed that when I was young, I said this 30 times already, when I was young and I was going to church and they had the white Jesus in there, and they even gave us books. And I couldn't understand why everything costs money. You damn near had to steal to get candy, right? But somehow they gave you these Bibles. They were like free to you, you know. You could just walk up in the church, okay, standing outside the church. They'll just give you these pamphlets for free in these Bibles. And when you open them, they had the pictures of white Jesus in there, right? But nobody said, okay, he's all colors, so let's leave images out. Years ago, they had Bibles. I'm a little old school. They had Bibles with the images in there, and they had images of white people in there. But nobody said, well, wait a minute, son, he can look like you too. They didn't give you that option because that's what you saw. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to go into a couple of old Bibles. So he said it wasn't in the Greek. It didn't say it in there. So I'm going to go through this again if I can. Let's go to the Bible of 1382, the John Wycliffe Bible. 1382. It says, Revelations 1 and 14. And the head of him and his hairs were white like wool, white as wool. It was white as white wool. Let me say that. The head of him and his hairs were white as white wool, and as snow, and the iron of him flame of fire, and his feet like to lantern, and as brindaged in a brindaged chimney. So I'm going to just stop right there. And the head of his hairs, as we go to the regular interpretation, because that's all we really need. But I just wanted to get another word for fine brass. The head of his head and his hairs were white like wool. So they will say, okay, his head, you know, the racist, you know, Edos, they'll say, well, his head was all white. And that was a white, first of all, white. Nobody is actually white. Okay? Nobody's actually white. Now you're describing someone black. Nobody's actually black either, but you can describe somebody to be the color of a darker hue, right? So anyway, his head and his hairs were white like wool, right? Like is just a connecting word, and is a connecting word describing wool. Somehow Vocabs said, somehow he said it's not describing, it's only describing the texture, it's only describing white or snow or something like that. He didn't even go into that right. It says as white as snow. So now why would John the Revelator say white like wool? So clearly you see here, when you go to the other text, clearly you see here it's saying white like wool, which the connecting word is and white. Let's go to Revelation. Let's go back over here to the Bible, the old Bible. Of his head and his hairs were white, right? As white wool. It says here, as white wool. So why would he describe a complexion to wool? Now he said white, and then as you keep reading it says, and as snow. So right here, this word here is saying his head of his hairs were white, describing the color of his hair and the texture of his hair. Because then that was the case, he wouldn't have to say wool, would he? Wouldn't have to say the word wool in there. Secondly, we must understand that John the Revelator was only describing his complexion because of the beautiful look that he had. Really had nothing to do with color in a sense. I mean, it had everything to do with him being so-called black, but it really wouldn't have, because everybody was so-called black. I mean, the Israelites were so-called black anyway, so we had different hues and shades of brown. So if he was just some regular so-called black-looking person, that wouldn't have to be described. So he had to have a really dark, melanated, beautiful, glowing complexion. And that's all it's saying. It was well known that the Israelites had skin complexion. So it says, well, white as wool, and it says, and his feet like unto lantern. Now you go to lantern as it burneth in the chimney. So that brings me back to Revelation. And we go into fine brass, which he said was not in there. But when you look at fine brass, it says,
Strong's G 5474, Chalkalibanat. Chalkalibanat.
Chalkolibion, which means some metal like gold, if not more precious, right? So this is what they give fine brass to be. Now, when you look at real gold or real fine brass, it's not actually a yellowish tint at all. Now, when you go to lantern, I'm going to show you here, which we saw in the other translations. It says chalkolibion, meaning whiteness or brilliancy, right? Meaning being brilliant. But it also means burnished copper. So when John was describing Yahushua, it was on a high level of excellency. You know, his complexion, his look, who he was. It was something different. Okay? So when you look at burnished copper, you can type in burnished copper, an alloy of copper. Now that goes back to what we saw in lantern or fine brass. When you look up fine brass, it just means burnished copper. Okay? So when you say here, it says his head was like white like wool, white as snow, his eyes were a flame of fire. Yes, it can go to physical. Then it can go with flame of fire, meaning he had reddish eyes, but you can say spiritually there too. But then it goes back to the physical, and his feet like unto fine brass as it burned. It's all pretty much physical when you think about it. It's just describing what they describe about his hair, his complexion, and his voice is all a physical thing. It says his feet unto fine brass as if they burned. Now Vocabs switched it and said burned mean burning. Now when you look at fine brass is a very dark color. Lantern. When you look at also, when you go to the Tinsdale Bible, it says, and his feet like unto brass as though they had brent in a furnace. When you look up Brent goes back to crude oil. Can go to a brownish to dark brown. So when you go back up here to Revelation, he said fine brass as if they had burned. His feet were like fine brass. When you look at fine brass, it's like lantern. That's why I put lantern there first. Lantern is, what do we see? Lantern is burnished copper, burnt copper. So when you look at, and this is past tense, and it says as if they burned in a furnace. Burned meaning past tense. Well, Vocab says no, it's still burning. Well, let's go look in the online etymology for this stuff, you know. We look at the online etymology, it says to cut, it says a candle's burnt part of a candle. They gave an idea. The burnt part of a candle wick, which would be dark. But when you go to etymology of burnt, it means scorched by fire. Past participle ejector from the original past. Participle of burn, which is displaced by burned, right? Burnt offering, animal, burnt whole, altar, Jewish ritual. They had to put that in there. The Jewish ritual, a biblical phrase, is Exodus 24. Burnt, as used in theatrical makeup and blackface acts. Let me see here. It says it goes to brûlé, burned, past participle, to burn, Old English, it means to pass. Let me go here. So it's so much on this. All you got to do is look, everybody know that burnt meaning is actually past tense, right? So it says original past, burnt, past participle, adjective from an original past, which is the place after by burned, burnt. Okay, so clearly we all know burnt has nothing to do with burning, or it would have said burning, right? So we know that it was burnt. So when it says, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. Now the other translation says burnished chimney, like a burnt chimney. Now we all know a burnt chimney. When you see this word furnace, everybody automatically thinks of the glow, the fire. But this is why it was explained that as if they burnt. So there's no way around the fact that his feet was like unto fine brass or lantern or burnished copper, which when you look at the images of fine brass, you can Google it, or burnished chimney or burnt lantern, it's all going to be very dark. They gave it an etymology, a burnt candle wick. And what's wrong with that? Why do these people have such hatred? See, if everybody's fighting for him to be a so-called white man, there wouldn't be none of these arguments, man. As long as we didn't know, there was no arguments about it. There was no issues. There was no problems. There was no argument. But now, all of a sudden, there's this big argument because we know now. Now, the Chinese can have their Jesus, right? The Buddhists can have their Jesus. The Hamites can have theirs. The white man definitely had his. That's what corrupted the world. Art imitating life. But for whatever reason, nope, not us. There's an issue. All you got to do is go into the different translations, go into the different lookups of these words, and you'll find that Revelation clearly was talking about the skin complexion, and he didn't have to really mention him being black because it was well known that the Israelites was black and that Yahushua was black. But he described them, ultimately the Lord put it there for us today, but it was also at that time describing the beauty of him and the makeup of how he looked and glowed. It was a beautiful thing to see. Anyway, that's all I have on that. Shalom.